Throughout human history, when someone dares to dream of a differently organized, more equitable civilization, they're usually berated, attacked verbally and physically, and otherwise generally convicted by the status quo as hapless dreamers who don't understand the world. Worse, if the visionary has the ability to architect their idea, the status quo unremorsefully just slays them. Status quo might be the most monstrous concept in human history. The status quo monster declares people like you and me with our crazy ideas about social equity and a conscious universe as utopian idealists with impossible to implement schemes. And of course it does. The status quo monster doesn't exist if people stop believing in it, stop feeding its endless, consumptive lust. So, status quo must keep its worshipful throngs at any cost, and that begins by denying them any freedom of thought, especially about organizing society differently, without status quo as an infallible monarch. There is no questioning the authority of status quo, no exploring new possibilities or new systems of government, because status quo knows best and fervently believes that it can never be matched by anything else humans attempt to do. If some clever folks think they have a better idea, status quo will assuredly ridicule them and drag them through the murky court of public opinion with half-truths, fear-mongering politics, and bad math until the new ideas, really easily implementable, are just seen as too radical to even consider. Status quo even tried to silence Albert Einstein, who responded, "If at first an idea is not absurd, then there's no hope for it." I refuse to give up on the hope of a better life for humankind. A life where we aren't enslaved to a king, lord, or corporation, but are free to build and paint and dance and sing and explore. I will never stop dreaming and doing my best to implement about a world based on the visions and creations of billions of imaginations instead of a status quo of distilled fear. Jesus asks his followers to resist status quo. Well, no, not to resist it, but to eradicate it. Because Jesus has a different, radical concept about organizing society from the bottom up instead of from the top down. His spirituality of oneness with God and all things influenced his interest in re-engineering our politics, our economics, really every aspect of our social structure. This awakened awareness of his intimate quantum entanglement with God helped Jesus recognize God's entanglement in everything and everyone. This recognition of the inherent divine core of all being in every being, recognition of God in each object from tadpole to tetrahedron, drove Jesus to try to overthrow the most powerful empire of the era, arguably the most powerful empire ever. Jesus lived to eliminate the imperial status quo and to introduce his followers to a radically different vision of civilization. His concept of organizing as humans instead of nations is so radical that his followers have really never fully implemented it. Status quo monster resists Jesus' vision of a world where everyone is cared for and loved, because when we love each other, love becomes the status quo, and the monster disappears. Radically different. Jesus wants nothing less than to topple the way we organize our world. Radically different. It's that radical part that Jesus' followers seem to keep misunderstanding as they cozy up to today's emperors and religious corporations, insisting it's not only impossible to change, but that it's also undesirable. And yeah, I suppose change is undesirable for the 1% for whom the system's working. For the rest of us, this world and its obsession with money and power is cruel, uncaring, and frustratingly unfair. Jesus was a revolutionary who believed our frustrations and systemic inequity could be changed, not merely by him, not through some magical incantations or ritual sacrifices, and definitely not by this sweeping hand of justice. Real and lasting change is only achieved by we the people, dreaming bigger and resisting status quo monster until we defeat it. As the prophet Taylor Swift once said, haters gonna hate, but we can never let that hateful resistance stop us. Change, drastic and enduring, can and should happen right now. Resistance to ideas, to Jesus' ideas, is just proof that we're on the right track. Status quo tells us our ideas are terrible and unrealistic. Status quo loves to tell people that their ideas are unrealistic, especially if we dare to talk about redistributing wealth and abolishing private property. Ideas not from Karl Marx or Chairman Mao, but straight from the mouth of Jesus Christ. Of course, status quo didn't like him very much either. I have more conversations than I can count. Disappointing discussions with people who tell me I'm a dreamer or say I'm asking for too much when I suggest something like abolishing the billionaire class through taxation. You can't abolish billionaires, that's unfair to them, people exclaim. But abolishing billionaires is a very Jesus idea. When he says to pay Caesar what's owed in Mark 12:17, he's actually telling rich people to pay their fair share of taxes. What, you haven't heard Mark 12:17 described as Jesus' plea to pay your taxes? Well, that's another attack of the status quo monster that makes Jesus a friend of the wealthy, which he demonstrably was not. People look at me as if I've grown a third eye when I suggest that abolishing a privileged, controlling minority is precisely what Jesus was after and is only considered a radical idea by people who are either sitting pretty in that 1% power minority or who are so hypnotized by the way we've always done it that they can't fathom anything different and more equitable possibly working. For most of our human history, our political and economic models, particularly in Western cultures, have favored a few ludicrously rich and powerful people at the top, whom everyone else serves. I'm afraid that we've operated under that paradigm for so long that even those abused by the system defend it. Even followers of Jesus, one of the most radical, give-it-all-away humans to ever exist, have fallen prey to the status quo monster. Humans are not created to serve as a labor force for wealthy overlords. We are created in God's image to be creative. But that inherent gift is pummeled out of us by a greedy, jealous status quo. The prophets, particularly Isaiah, take our leaders to task and urge again, we the people, to adjust to changing times by doing new things to rectify the situation. Isaiah asks us to adapt and innovate, not to accept the fate status quo dishes out to us. We are meant to resist our dehumanization, to fight status quo, to stop taking an active role in the evisceration of our souls. Isaiah writes, the things announced in the past, look, they've already happened, but I'm declaring new things. Before they even appear, I tell you about them. Warrior and mother, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing God's praise from the ends of the earth. Sing a new song. Do a new thing. Don't listen to the naysayers and so-called experts who will tell you it cannot be done. It can be done. Again, humans are created to create. We are at our best when we innovate, allowing God to inspire us to unparalleled realities. But nobody can imagine anything, much less make their dreams come true, if they're hungry, sick, and uneducated, shackled and brainwashed by the status quo monster. So, let's together free each other from status quo's poverty-inducing bindings. Let's choose to wake up and enter a lighter way of being human, a brighter, happier, more peaceful, conscious coexistence. And I have to tell you, it's really easy to begin. All we have to do is let your imagination soar to places you didn't previously dare dream of. Ask your friends and relatives and even strangers for help building the world we all want to live in, diverse, caring, nurturing, sharing, loving, and compassionate. Get to know your neighbors. Get to know your coworkers. Learn a foreign language. Eat a delicacy from a culture you don't know anything about. Listen to music you don't like. Examine a piece of art that disgusts you and consider why you're reacting negatively. Find the positive in everything and help other people find it too. To transform status quo once and for all, we must learn to love one another. And that only seems difficult because status quo keeps telling us to fear each other. But if we all do a little loving and learning and getting to know one another, and if we do this all each day, then before we know it, the new world we build will be unshakably encouraging and endlessly creative, because the only status quo will be unconditional love. Amen. Our question to consider today for discussion is, what do you see in the status quo that needs transformation? In hindsight, maybe this is a bit of a loaded question, but it should be interesting to see what you all think about this. What do you see in the status quo that needs transformation? I see everybody is laughing. Can't wait. Okay, let's go into breakout rooms for a few moments, although really I don't want to. But let's go to small groups just for a couple of minutes to discuss with each other, and then we'll get back together into the big room to share with each other. If you are a little introverted and don't want to go into a small group, that's great. You're welcome to stay here and just visit with me or just hang out. If you'll accept the invitations on your screens, I'll talk to you in about 8 minutes.